You actually also wrote an essay called Domestic Intelligence Today, More Security but Less Liberty, where you describe how we've created this new domestic intelligence enterprise that collects a lot of information at the state and local level. And you said that the creation of this has altered the balance between security and liberty, and that while it's clear we're moving toward more government control, that we've seen a benefit in security. But what metrics do we have to measure whether that investment in this domestic intelligence enterprise is actually improving security?
That's a great question. On the issue of the balance between security and liberty, I think one important point is that soon after 9/11, most of our government officials and the 9/11 Commission itself argued that there didn't have to be a trade-off between security and liberty. We could have both. I think that's wrong. I think that what we're finding, and the Obama administration is acknowledging that today, we are finding that in order to have greater security on the domestic front, we may have to give up some civil liberties. We may have to have more intrusive government interference and surveillance. The important thing, though, is to realize that the place we put that balance should be something that we as a society can recalibrate. And I don't think that's happened. We haven't done that since 9/11. We haven't been able to get a good handle on an agreement among our government agencies on what the nature of the threat is today and whether or not we have put that balance too much toward security and not enough toward civil liberties. But I'll say that a way that I think we should measure, a sort of a gauge to determine whether domestic intelligence efforts are proper, is that we should use the same sort of thinking that the Food and Drug Administration uses to decide whether a drug should be able to be used by for the public. And that is, of course, that a drug needs to be safe and effective. If we look at it that way, first of all, that means that a domestic intelligence effort needs to be effective. It needs to actually be able to either stop bad things from happening or have some other value. And here I don't think our government has done a good enough job of being able to make that case. But the other part is it needs to be safe for civil liberties, individual freedoms, at some level that we in society agree is the appropriate level. I think right now it looks as if the balance is off. We haven't been able to determine that these programs are sufficiently effective, and we do think it's possible that they may be causing problems for our individual liberties.
And do you think the excessive secrecy, certainly around our national intelligence programs, but even around the domestic intelligence programs, is actually inhibiting both that discussion and the democratic control over these institutions that would require that kind of analysis?
I think we definitely need to have what we've started to have, but we only have started to have it, which is a much better national discussion about intelligence. Certainly back during the Cold War and during the time when I was busy in my military intelligence career, intelligence was a topic for spy novels and occasionally for public discussion, but for the most part, not very much. But today, especially because the information that's being collected, the dots that are being collected are about you and me, they're about the American people. The American people need to have more oversight, more availability to discuss these programs. Although I got to admit, when I was an intelligence officer, I wouldn't have wanted greater public freedom and public information because that would seem to harm the process.
But as a naval intelligence officer, your focus was at hostile foreign nations or hostile
that's right.
organizations.
And that's one of the big shifts in intelligence since 9/11 that I think maybe the American people don't quite realize sufficiently. It's that we really have changed the focus for much of our American intelligence community. When I was a naval intelligence officer tracking the Soviet Navy back during the Cold War, for instance, one of our guiding principles was don't spy on Americans. Well, after 9/11, we realized, and I believe it's absolutely true, we realized that there are threats that can involve Americans. There are threats that can be within our country. So we now sometimes need to spy on Americans. But I'm not sure whether the same intelligence agencies, the same intelligence officers who used to spy overseas or spy on the Soviet Navy, I'm not sure whether those organizations and individuals are the right ones to be doing the spying on Americans. For instance, I don't think you, as an American, would want to hire me, someone who trained and grew up in the old ways. You wouldn't want to hire me to conduct domestic surveillance. I don't have that skill set.
And with the terrorism incidents that were thwarted, it was traditional law enforcement methods that mostly were most effective. Is there a way that we can turn the domestic intelligence activities, turn those resources into more of that traditional policing, do you think?
I think that it's important, if we can somehow find a way to have our domestic intelligence agencies and effort achieve the same level of trust and understanding with the American people that law enforcement does. Now, certainly there are problems with law enforcement in different communities. In New York City, for instance, the NYPD is under fire for civil liberties violations, charges, those sorts of things. But still, law enforcement as a whole throughout America is generally respected by the American people. And our communities know that if they're not happy with their sheriff's department, chances are they can vote in a new sheriff. Well, we don't have that opportunity at the national level. And so that's why one of the things that I think we need to do is re-emphasize in some way the state and local, sort of the lower level intelligence and surveillance and law enforcement assets, and bring those to bear. You can much more easily calibrate the nature of your domestic surveillance effort at a local level than you can at the national level.
Right. And with traditional law enforcement, oversight mechanisms are built in through the courts, through civil procedures. How does intelligence oversight fail? Have you looked at that at all? And did that play a role in any of this, the successfully thwarted attacks, that it was actually oversight mechanisms that compelled the intelligence agencies to act more effectively?
I think that certainly at the national level, the 9/11 Commission pointed out, and I think they're absolutely correct, that one of the problems before 9/11 was that the intelligence community did not have sufficient oversight, in the sense that intelligence oversight really has two parts to it. One is to try to make sure that the intelligence agencies don't violate the law, don't do something wrong. But the second part that often doesn't get enough attention is that intelligence oversight can and should help intelligence agencies and officials focus on the things that need to be focused on. Before 9/11, really nobody was focusing on international terrorism. The intelligence overseers never grilled the director of the CIA on why you're not spending more time worrying on those things. So I think that way, today, we need to have that type of oversight as well. But one issue is that when you get down to the state and local level, oversight involves many different organizations, many different localities and jurisdictions, so it's a more complicated problem.
So how do Americans evaluate the performance of the intelligence enterprise? You quote Robert Jervis, who said that for Americans to expect the intelligence community to predict non-routine political occurrences is unrealistic. And you yourself says that some sort of surprise is inevitable. So if prevention of strategic surprise is the mission and surprise is inevitable, how do Americans evaluate whether the $70 million investment, the risk to their civil liberties, are actually worth the security product they receive in return?
Measuring intelligence value is a tough job. In fact, I remember during my intelligence career, one of my bosses once kind of asked me in frustration, can you ever tell me what a pound of intelligence is worth? And there's no way to do that. In a military sense, you can judge how much a gallon of gasoline is worth, or how much a trained pilot is worth. But intelligence is tougher. What we do usually do is sort of revert back to that maybe most simple measurement, which is whether or not bad things happen. And that's the quote that political scientists like Robert Jervis have typically used. We want intelligence to keep us safe from bad things. And during the Cold War, that usually meant keep us safe from nuclear annihilation. And that worked pretty well. But during the Cold War, lots of Americans died in lots of incidents and small wars around the world. Today the concern is, and I think it's legitimate, that our intelligence officials are saying we're trying to hold the intelligence community to a higher standard, trying to prevent the death of one individual American in a terrorist attack, for instance. And that really is impossible. But what I think we need to do is realize that intelligence and the American intelligence community does many different things. When we're looking domestically, I think the intelligence community needs to be able to better explain its performance against this very specific problem of domestic terrorism. And here I think we have a problem, because it hasn't been shown to even the official studies that looked at it that the National Security Agency programs have actually had a hand in stopping terrorist plots. But it's also important to keep in mind that the intelligence community is involved with many other things than just that. And I think that having a better national discussion, a national dialogue, the American people will realize that there are many other problems and issues that the intelligence community around the world and within the United States focuses on, and that often provides a great deal of value.
And it's nice that we're having some of that dialogue, but it's somewhat by accident because there were leaks. Where, do you think the intelligence community could be better at providing more information so the American people can have a better understanding of what the debate is about?
Absolutely. The intelligence community is typically very bad at public relations, although really today it's much better than it used to be. I remember back during the Cold War, we used to talk about the National Security Agency as no such agency. During my Navy career, I was in fact a reporter for a little while. And once I tried to call the NSA for comment, and they didn't even have a press office. So we're much better than we are today. But we're still not good enough. And I think the intelligence community needs to realize that what I call receptivity, in other words, the trust and understanding between the intelligence agencies and its consumers, the people who receive intelligence and pay the bills, that receptivity and trust is vital. And right now we definitely don't have that on a domestic level between the American people and the intelligence community. And basically the intelligence community needs to step up its act when it comes to public relations.
Great. And what reforms would you recommend?
I think two major changes are needed. One on the national level and another on the state and local level. On the national level, as I mentioned earlier, I think that we need a new type of intelligence agency, a new type of intelligence mindset when we focus the telescope of intelligence, if you will, away from the rest of the world and focus it on the domestic population. What I would like to see is a new domestic intelligence agency similar to the British MI5, their domestic security agency. Now, I think it's probably doubtful that we'd ever have the national will and the budget and the money to set up an agency like that. But we might be able to do something with either continuing to reform the FBI intelligence effort or perhaps turn the DHS intelligence effort, which is usually sort of the considered a small player in the intelligence community, but beef up that effort and have an organization that uses the tools and techniques of intelligence, but at the same time is very understanding about the need for civil liberties and privacy, the sorts of things that law enforcement officials are typically used to. But at the same time we're doing that at the national level, we need to have a more robust and even more professional state and local intelligence effort. There are a lot of efforts going on around the country establishing new intelligence fusion centers and developing law enforcement intelligence, policing intelligence efforts. I think we need to step that up because, as I mentioned before, I think it's at the local level that you can calibrate those intelligence efforts much more appropriately. You may find you need a different type of intelligence effort in New York City than you do in Seattle or Portland, for instance.
And again, when you're using the term intelligence, you're not talking about bulk data surveillance. You're talking more focused.
That's efforts. Right. I really think that unless the national intelligence community can explain to the American people better what the value has been so far of the bulk surveillance programs, I think that what I found in my book is the case, and that is that it's not big data, it's little data that stops bad things from happening. One
of the things I really appreciate about what you're writing is that how much it's important for the American people to have this discussion, and your book and your articles are certainly a contribution to that discussion. What other reading materials would you point to that viewers could look at and get a better understanding of the intelligence community?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to say that in addition to my book I hope is a good introduction to the broader questions about intelligence and intelligence failure. I think actually we have a bit of a problem because although there's a lot of good work out there that's been done looking at the current National Security Agency and domestic intelligence problems, a lot of good work done by some of the official studies, such as the President's Review Group that issued a several hundred-page report. The problem is those reports are awfully long. A lot of good information there, but I would encourage that someone interested in this take a look and skim reports like those. For instance, there are also the dueling opinions by two federal judges, one that ruled that these programs are constitutional, the other that ruled that they're not. A lot of good information there, but kind of hard to wade through, I've got to admit. One of the most useful single articles that I've seen recently on this was just in Foreign Affairs recently by Daniel Byman and Benjamin Wittes, called Reforming the NSA, in the Foreign Affairs May-June 2014 issue. And I think they sort of struck a good sort of middle ground. Usually the op-eds and the opinion pieces we read are either that the NSA is doing a terrible job and Edward Snowden was a hero, or the NSA, on the other hand, the NSA is doing a great job and Edward Snowden was a traitor. Well, the truth may be somewhere in the middle there. I also think, in fact, that one of the authors of that Foreign Affairs piece, Benjamin Wittes, has a very useful blog called the Lawfare blog. He's a fellow at Brookings and has a lot of good, interesting coverage on these issues on his blog.
Great. Well, I thank you so much for your contribution and for speaking with me today. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.